just like you would anything else. It's time to do an inventory of everything that's on your back end of your website. Also, it's not just your site. It's Meta and the pixels that you're doing for those tracking. It's the plugins. It's the chatbots. It's everything. And it's all collecting data to some degree. Welcome to the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. I am Jennifer.
And I'm Corey.
And today is part 2 of our conversation around pixels, privacy, and performance. Specifically, what independent physician practices need to be doing right now.
Yeah, so we recorded part 1 of this just to kind of set the table and talk about some of the privacy and HIPAA-related regulations and changes to kind of be aware of. So if you haven't listened to that one, I highly suggest doing so. This is part 2 and meant to say, okay, well, now that we have sort of the background here, what are some of the things that we can do as independent physician groups or multi-location practices, really, or just groups that rely on digital marketing to grow.
Yeah, and let's make sure we set the stage here. This episode is it's not a hospital IT episode. This is certainly not a legal seminar. Corey and I are marketers. We're not legal, we're not attorneys. And it's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, turn everything off conversation. We're saying we need data and we need to make sure we're using it responsibly. And there's some things we need to get, we need to get our ducks in a row because this is a real issue and we're seeing it across 20 different states and we got to pay attention to it.
Yeah, so very top level, just kind of recap is that there is a rise in lawsuits related to HIPAA and privacy violations. A lot of practices use Google Analytics on your site and don't have proper cookie opt-ins and things like that. And Google Analytics just in and of itself technically is a PHI HIPAA violation. So what we wanted to do was just provide some framing here for that. So knowing that, marketing in healthcare, it's not going away. The numbers aren't being shut down or anything like that, but it is being reshaped. It is being recalibrated. And so the goal of this episode is to help you reduce risk and protect your brand and make sure that marketing is still effective. So again, like Jen said, that we're not lawyers. We don't even play them on TV, but we do want to talk through some of the things that from a best practice standpoint you can be doing right now.
Yeah, we're an agency and our job is to help our practices that we work with adapt, but not to panic. This is just another thing that we have to now deal with and it's all good.
Right. So there's some realities that kind of come with this conversation, especially if you're an independent practice, and that are more than likely why you're exposed to some risk here. You probably don't have an in-house legal team. You're using off-the-shelf website and plugins. Like I mentioned, Google Analytics, that's what 99% of people use. And a lot of these risks can come from either templates or plugins or old campaigns you don't even think about anymore, or best practices that are borrowed from other industries, which are also facing some of these issues. But we talked a lot about that in the first part of this. So kind of key takeaways are, obviously these compliance issues are not intentional. Sometimes they're inherited. Sometimes they're accidental because you don't know what you don't know. But ultimately, there still is this sort of rise in potential lawsuits and issues. So that's what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and basically, you nailed it, Corey. A lot of this relates to the way we're tracking analytics and apps and plugins and things like that. If you built your website yourself and you installed analytics, just uninstall it until you figure it out. If you went to an agency, you've been tracking data forever. This is why you need a healthcare specific agency or someone paying attention to these types of things. So let's get into how tracking is kind of part of patient trust at this time.
Yeah, so patients don't really separate marketing from privacy or experience. It's all just kind of one and the same. They they want to get some care, that they're checking out your website, checking out your socials, and clicking on an ad maybe. But the problem arises with something feels careless or invasive. That can be, what can come out of that is eroding trust, or maybe reviews wind up suffering if someone is unhappy, or referrals can kind of dry up. And even if you're doing everything right, you've been sailing along here pretty smooth, you can have a patient that goes to a website and maybe they clicked on something that's a condition that you treat, and then later they see an ad not even related to you, but just about that condition, and they get kind of riled up because they didn't have that ad before. They went to your website, now they're seeing the ad, and now you've got a problem.
Yeah, and this is what we're seeing across the board. And like I said, there's 20 different states that are getting new policies on the books, and there's 4 that have a policy on the books, and there's no kind of nationwide thing. And there's this new cottage industry kind of popping up in a lot of lawsuits, especially class actions. It's very reminiscent of the elevation in the conversation related to ADA compliance. So we just need to get our ducks in a row. So let's really talk about right now, which is what this episode's about. What is it, if I'm a practice, what can I do right now to minimize the risk? I don't think we're going to eliminate it, because the rules are changing, and sometimes there aren't even rules. So what can we do right now as a practice to minimize this risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is probably just pausing and kind of taking inventory. That alone will reduce some risk, but I would say don't add new pixels or chatbots or tracking plugins or anything like that until you kind of get a handle on everything that you've already got. So look to see what's kind of running on your website. Google Analytics, we mentioned that a few times already. That's a big one. Google Tag Manager, if you have any meta pixels or anything like that, any sort of call tracking going on, any type of forms, whether that's an appointment form, a quiz form, a billing question form,
Contact form, you name it.
Yeah, all of those things. You need an inventory of all of that stuff. So that way you know what's running, where it's running, and where that data is actually going. So for example, if someone fills out that contact form and they say they'd like to cancel their appointment for next Wednesday, if they do that in kind of like an open environment, technically that's PHI. And if you're just housing that on your website, it just goes into whatever backend that you're running, and the form is just sitting there. That is also a HIPAA violation. So it's more than you think. It's wide reaching.
It really is, and especially if you've had a website for years and you've been adding to it, and you haven't started from scratch. Like sometimes, like in this instance, it might be easier sometimes to start from scratch, because then at least you could build it from the ground up with some of these compliance issues being addressed. Because if you built your site 20 years ago or 10 years ago, some of this stuff was really kind of like before the wild west. They hadn't even like sent you out there to stake your claim. I think some of this really matters to practices, Corey, because most of our practices don't, and any of us, if you're not a web person, you don't always know what's running on your website. You don't know where it's running, and you also don't know what data it's touching. So I think what you just said is, pause, take a step back, just like you would anything else. It's time to do an inventory of everything that's on your back end of your website. Also, it's not just your site, it's Meta and the pixels that you're doing for those tracking. It's the plugins, it's the chatbots, it's everything, and it's all collecting data to some degree.
Right. Yeah. And there are some high risk pages and areas on your site that are either overlooked sometimes, or that you may not even think, like clearly there's no PHI on this page, but depending on the day of the week and who you're talking to, that still could be a problem. So for example, condition pages. So if I'm a user and I go and I look at a condition page just to learn more about something that you treat, that creates a click ID that gets sent to Google Analytics. Technically, that is a HIPAA violation. So I mean, that's one that people don't really think about a lot. Some other ones that are often overlooked include provider bios that's tied to a specialty, telehealth pages, even a portal login can be one, online scheduling tools, appointment requests, intake forms, like we mentioned earlier, billing, um, pretty much any page on your website.
Yeah, and here's kind of the thing about it. Like, these are the pages on your site. Like, your entire site is where HIPAA, FTC enforcement, which we're seeing a lot of now, and all these state health laws are all overlapping, and which ones take precedence over the other. So it's your website where everyone's starting to pay attention to. This is where the escalation and the conversation is taking place, because your website is like this like treasure trove of data potentially, and it's data that we're not even aware that's being transferred on, or that you're probably not aware that's being transferred on. And now there's scrutiny, and we gotta get our house in order. And part of it, like, look, I don't want to overthink it. I also don't want to like minimize it too much, but you can eliminate a lot of this stuff by just taking a step back and getting a sense of the full picture, and then just going down the list and fixing this and fixing that and fixing this.
Right. Yeah. And, some of it's going to sound silly, like adjusting the URLs and things like that, because, we're also balancing this with SEO and GEO, right? So, PHI, sometimes, you can say that it kind of leaks by accident, which is the most common problem. But like, as an example, if you're a OBGYN practice or a fertility practice, you probably have something that's like /fertility or /fertility-help or something like that. And like I said, that is PHI. You don't want to change that into a string of zeros and ones, because then that hurts SEO. So your option then becomes, well, how do I track that so I still know who's kind of coming to that page, or how many people are coming to that page, but not who. I'm not sharing that data with anybody. So there's some tools that you can use to do that. But the same thing with forms. You might think of something as innocuous as like a reason for a visit. Well, that's PHI, and depending on what actually happens with that data, because all that stuff kind of flows up to either an ad platform or analytics, or vendors you didn't even think about that you just never really intended to share that with. So that's more on kind of it doesn't really matter why, but that is an accidental kind of configuration, or not blocking certain pages that you need to. And then couple that with kind of the consent confusion, which is where a lot of people misunderstand exactly how things work or what you actually have to do. You may have a cookie banner on your website for new users that says, you have to accept these, but that is not HIPAA authorization, because to actually apply, you have to sign something, or you have to physically type in that you accept something. You can't just hit the button. So accepting cookies as a button is not permission to market using that health data. And then if any vendor that you work with on the site can see health related info, you really should have a BAA, or the tool shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think that's, and you can't even determine who the vendor is until you do that inventory. So step one is you got to do the inventory.
Right. And then, once you have your inventory, then there's, for the purpose of this conversation, we kind of set it up into like two different buckets, but there's a safer sort of operating model here. So bucket one, we'll call it, you kind of have PHI free analytics. So that's where you can still see website performance. You can still see traffic trends. You can still kind of see content engagement, how many clicks it's getting, if people are scrolling, how long they're on the page, that kind of thing. But everything is anonymous. So there's nothing that actually tracks back up to a Google or a Meta, as an example, but you still get those analytics. So that's one side of this. The other bucket, or the other side of it, is advertising that can focus on either geography or specific services or education. Some tools like Meta has done a good job here recently of adjusting condition-based advertising and changing the way that they are sort of creating the audience for you to market to. One, to kind of save themselves, but also to kind of save their advertisers. But really, what it kind of comes down to is you you want, your goal is to preserve performance and defensibility just in case something ever does happen. And so there's certain measures that you can take on your side to make sure that happens. Again, I would say that PHI free analytics is one of the bigger ones. Yes, you still want that cookie plugin that kind of pops up and makes people accept something, even though that's not going to fully protect. But then you also want something outlined in your privacy policy that says that this is what we do and what we do not do with your data. So that way it's very black and white, and you take every reasonable step that you can to protect that.
Yeah, and I think that's all really good information. I think like the theme there is like, okay, this is happening. There's no reason to panic. It needs to be a priority. But there's no reason to panic. We got to get our hands around it. So, kind of mentioned it at the top and in the previous episode, like the states are just doing their own thing because there's no like national policy. And so here's what your practice really needs to pay attention to right now. Don't be overwhelmed by it. There are 20 plus states working on privacy laws. You don't need to like engineer for each of them unless you're in every state, which I know that your practice is not. You're probably in one state, maybe 2 counties within a state. What you need to do is identify, if you're in multi-states, identify those 3 to 5 patient states, because it's going to matter. I think it's going to matter not where your practice is, but where your patients are coming from. That you're going to have to play for those. If you're, on the edge of, Kansas and Missouri, then you got to pay attention to both of them. But identify those 3 to 5, and then know if there are any health specific states. Like, are you in the states that have the privacy policies already outlined? There's 4 of them that have strong policies on the books. They're Washington, Nevada, Connecticut, and Maryland. And there's 20 or so that are actually working on getting policies on the books probably in the next year or so. And then apply stricter controls like the stuff we're talking about in the states that matter. If you want to preemptively just get in front of this because it's coming, great. But the ones that you have to pay attention to are the 4 that already have privacy policies on the books. And then there's 20 or more that are probably going to have them in the next year or so, depending on what their state legislatures are doing. I think that at the end of the day, smart targeted compliance is going to beat overreaction. So just keep that in mind, because as a practice administrator, you have so many fires that you're putting out on any given day. You are a professional firefighter at this point. We just lit another fire that you have to pay attention to. So let's get it while it's small and not make it into a big thing.
Exactly. And, there is an upside to this too. This sort of privacy forward marketing can serve as a differentiator for you, because you can build patient trust. You can lean into the fact that you're not sharing data with anyone, big tech or otherwise. Ideally, this can also potentially improve lead quality and reduce some wasted spend, because again, you're not giving up any sort of analytics or reporting in this scenario, at least not of the stuff that you normally use. Google Analytics is overpowered for what most practices need and what most healthcare marketers need. We just want to know if we are writing some content, is it actually moving the needle? Like, is it getting people to the website? And then once they get there, are they clicking around, and where are they going? We don't actually, we don't necessarily need to know like any sort of demographic data about them, and any sort of identifiable info, because you're going to get all that stuff when they become a patient, and then we can use that data to better target and whatnot. But we don't need it from your website, essentially. So these kind of first party strategies where we're talking about education, reviews, physician visibility, email reputation, all of those things. We still want to do all of that. That all still benefits. We just need to make sure that we're doing it in the most compliant way possible, which is going to be some version of like what I was talking about before with the PHI free analytics, and then some type of plugin that will help, block unwanted scripts. And then the last piece of it, I would say, is probably some type of HIPAA compliant form solution that will protect you if someone is filling out a form for one reason or another. So that way they, that their information or their contact info is not just kind of sitting on your website.
Yep. And shameless plug, we are working on this. So if you need help with this, feel free to reach out, even if you just want some guidance. I think the next piece of this is like governance without bureaucracy. Like we all deal with enough bureaucracy. Like we need to be realistic here. What actually works. So like simple rule, just, across the board policy to put into place. No new tracking without somebody reviewing it. Don't let somebody come to you and say, oh, I need you to throw this pixel on the website. Absolutely not. Just don't add anything new without a review. Make sure that there's kind of shared ownership in that decision tree. Marketing plus IT plus making sure that your vendor is understands compliance and it has like a compliance solution. Certainly make sure that before you do anything that you have clear answers to what tools are allowed on the website, which pages are those tools actually allowed on, and for what purpose. Just because it's some shiny object that you want to track, are you actually going to use it? Let's say that we only have so much room. Do you want to take a space to put whatever this is on there, because we need to understand the purpose of what this data is going to be. And then it's kind of like, the recurring lesson here is that it's the same thing. Like it's digital maturity, AI adoption, omni-channel marketing, like all of these things are going to be in front of you. And every one of these things, like, involves some kind of tracking. So rather than like get wrapped up in the bureaucracy of it all, think about just having your own internal governance to kind of manage the chaos that's going to come at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say kind of the big takeaway for all this stuff is, again, not that tracking is going away or anything like that. It's just that it's changing. And if you don't lose by changing, you're going to lose by ignoring what's being changed. And lose can mean a bunch of different things. It can mean you either lose your tracking. It could mean that you are involved in some lawsuits you don't want to be involved in. It can mean that you lose your marketing agency. It can mean you lose years.
You lose trust. You lose trust with patients. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that, again, kind of the takeaway, the positioning from our side is that, does this change some things? Sure. Does it create some new costs? Probably. But those costs are going to kind of insulate us and give us peace of mind and be well worth it. And it's going to lead to more credibility and ultimately a better experience for patients and for the providers and partners in a practice.
Yeah, totally. And I think at the end of the day, as we wrap up this episode, the goal isn't to track everything. We don't need to track everything. The goal is to track what actually matters and to do it without putting your practice at risk. That's it. So with that, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Corey.
We'll see you next time on the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. Thank you.
Talk soon. Bye, guys.
If you want more like this, hit like and subscribe so you'll always be alerted to new episodes when they come out. And if you want information about us, visit us over at insightmg.com. That's insightmg.com. We'll see you on the next episode.